My name is Aubrey, and I am Miami Church.
Mi nombre es George Santana.
I am Ajay Williams.
Mi nombre es María.
I'm Paul.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Allegra.
Mi nombre es Mark Herrera.
My name is Haley, and I am Miami Church.
Et je suis Miami Church.
I'm Will, and I'm Miami Church.
Nama saya Carmen. Saya adalah Miami Church.
My name is Kevin Sparrow, and I am Miami Church.
Je m'appelle Arnaud et je suis Miami Church.
I'm Carolina and I'm Miami Church.
Meu nome é Hudson e eu sou Miami Church.
My name is Crystal Guico, and I am Miami Church.
Yo soy Miami Church.
We are Miami Church.
And I am Miami Church.
And I am Miami Church.
And I am Miami Church.
All right, well, hey, good morning, guys. Welcome to Miami Church. If I don't know you, my name is Greg, and like Lady said, we're in part 4 of a message series we're calling All In, and it's really about your next step. That wherever you are in your faith journey or journey toward Jesus, that you would take your next step. Now, I want to start part 4 today with a story, and I'm going to take you back to 2010. Anybody remember 2010? Yeah, almost 10 years ago. In 2010, my wife and I were living in San Antonio. And that was, one fan, that's great. And the Riverwalk's cool. And we were living in San Antonio, and we didn't have any kids. I don't even remember what that life was like. And we were living there, and we moved in this awesome neighborhood. We bought this house like on a bank auction. It was really awesome. And we're living in this neighborhood, and we started to try to meet the people that lived around us. And we met this really fascinating couple, and they were really just bright and sharp. And she was a bank executive, like a senior bank executive. And he was one of those guys that programmed computers or something that he would tell you, and you still don't know what he did. And so we went over to their house for dinner. They invited us for dinner. We were so excited. And we go over, and they have this beautiful home. And we go over there, and we get there for dinner, and we realize we didn't know ahead of time that there was going to be another couple there. And so we walk in and we meet this other couple. And somehow I get in a conversation with the husband of the other couple. And this guy is intense. And I just met him. And all of a sudden, just in meeting, you ever met somebody and like immediately it just gets real serious? And you're like, whoa. Well, this guy just starts railing on refugees. And he starts just going off. He's like, hey, there's all of these refugees that are moving into our city. And they're taking our jobs, and they're polluting our schools, and they're going to destroy our economy. And he just starts going off on this. Now, let me give you a little context, right? So if you weren't in San Antonio in 2010, you don't have a little. In 2009, 2010, and even beyond that, San Antonio was one of the top places in the United States where primarily Iraqi and Syrian refugees were being resettled. And in fact, there was a space, like an apartment community, about 5 miles or so from where I lived, that a lot of these refugees were being resettled and into the space. And in fact, as I was kind of reminiscing on this whole kind of period in history, I was reading some articles, and I came across this amazing article from 2018 in the San Antonio Express News. And here's what it said. It was actually written from the place of a refugee. This was a 2018 article, and here's what she wrote. She said, 8 years ago, so that would have been 2010, right, in this season I was talking about, when my eldest child and I arrived in San Antonio as Iraqi refugees, we had an empty apartment and one small bag of clothes, right? So people are fleeing for their lives. They resettle in this apartment community. It's just a normal apartment community. You go in and like, here's a bag of clothes. God bless you, right? Here's what she wrote next. This is where I get a little emotional. She says, within days of being resettled in this apartment community, people from a nearby church were carrying heavy furniture into our home and bringing us food and other necessities. From that day on, I knew the city was home. Then she continued to write, it was exactly the welcome we needed after my family was forced to flee our native country due to our association with the United States military. Local San Antonians not only helped me to rebuild my life, but they introduced me to English language education programs that have enabled me to flourish. See, what was going on is I was serving at a church there in San Antonio, and our church had an amazing ministry to refugees. And we were collecting clothes and food and supplies and furniture and basic necessities in order to give to refugees who were moving in. And basically, like, they were given an apartment, a bag of clothes, and said, you got 3 months to figure out how to support yourself. You got to learn a language, you got to get a job, and you got to support yourself, and you got 3 months, go. Right? Like, right, not going to happen. Right? And so I was really proud of our church and what we did. And so here I was. Right? I walk into this house. I'm invited to dinner. I get into this conversation with this guy, and he just starts railing. Have you ever been in one of those moments where someone's talking to you, and you could just feel like your blood pressure is like rising? And I'm sure my cheeks were going red. I could just feel the anger just burning inside of me, right? And then you have a decision to make, right, in that moment, right? Like, do I say what I really want to say? Which, by the way, would end dinner, right? It's over. We're not going to get to eat, right? Or do I kind of hold back, right, and not really express what I really want to say? And so in that moment, I held back as best I could. I made a few counterpoints, but I held back. But I remember getting home that evening, right, after the dinner was over. And by the way, I don't even remember that guy's name. But I remember getting home that night, and I just remember still just being angry. And I just remember being frustrated. And I remember talking with my wife, Whitney, and just feeling it, my blood boiling inside of me. And my mind was racing, and I couldn't sleep that night. And I began thinking about those refugees that our church was trying to help, who had nothing, who were fleeing for their lives and were just given a little bag of clothes, and how we were trying to help them. And I started looking around my place, and I go, you know what? Man, I've got a house. We owned a house. We had 2 cars. I had a closet where I could actually go into my closet and I could choose which shirt I wanted to wear. I had options on shoes. And we could go out within reason to almost any restaurant in the city. And we had stuff. And I started thinking about my problems, right? You got problems? I started thinking about my problem, my frustrations. Like, man, that Wi-Fi is so slow. It's a first world problem. You ever had a first world problem? You got some first world problem? Like, my Bluetooth won't connect. It's terrible, isn't it? This is just horrible. Life is terrible, right? And I started thinking about some of my first world problems. And something happened that night. And this is why I tell you that story. Because that night was a defining moment. That dinner, that crazy dinner with that crazy guy who I don't even know who his name is. That night was a defining moment because something happened inside of my heart and something happened inside of Whitney's heart as we began to press through this. And it became a turning point, a defining moment where he said, you know what? We are blessed. We're blessed. We've got much. And it was probably the first time in my life that I said, you know what? We just got to own that. We got to just own it. We got to realize it. We got to embrace it. And we got to, we don't have to worry about our next meal. We don't have to worry about what we're going to wear. We have much. We have been blessed. And we made a decision in that season after wrestling with that for days and even weeks. We made a decision as a couple during that season that we set a goal. We set a goal, and he said, you know what? Our goal as a family, our goal as a couple is that one day, I don't know how this is going to happen. It seems impossible. And even today, as I stand here and say it out loud, I'm like, yeah, it seems crazy. But we made a decision that day that our goal as a family is to one day give away more than we keep. That one day, whatever our income is or whatever we receive or whatever we earn, that we would give at least 51 or more % away than we would keep. Because it was this defining moment where it took some crazy guy talking about refugees for me to realize, you know what? I am blessed and I have a lot. And there's these words that are in what's called the New Testament of the Bible, the second part of the Bible. And there was a guy named the Apostle Paul. Even if you're not a church person, you've heard of this guy. And Paul wrote these letters to churches, but he also wrote these letters to a mentor, the guy that he was mentoring, a guy named Timothy, who was a young leader. And he wrote these letters to Timothy, and he was given instructions. He said, hey, Timothy, listen, you're young. These are things you got to get. You got to understand this. This is important. And he said, not only do you got to get it, you got to teach other people. And he wrote these letters, and Paul, in Paul's style, the more if you study the Apostle Paul and who he is, he's very direct. He kind of gets to the point. He doesn't really mix a lot of words. And so I want to show you something he wrote to Timothy, and I just go ahead and warn you, it's kind of personal, like he kind of gets up in your face a little bit, and he writes these words. And so I'll show it to you here. It's in 1 Timothy chapter 6, and we'll begin in verse 17, and it'll be on the screens here behind me. Here's what he wrote. Again, he's writing to Timothy, this young leader. Verse 17, he says, Timothy, command. I mean, let's start with a big word there. Like command. Somebody uses the word command with you, you're like, whoa. Right? He says, command those who are what? Rich in this present world. Now, I just lost a bunch of you right here, right? Because what'd you do? You do what I do. Well, good. Thank you. Thanks, Pastor Greg. He's not talking to me. I'm out because I'm not rich, right? Because you don't feel rich. Do you feel rich? No. You don't feel rich. Like rich is, you know who rich is? Somebody that has more, right? It's kind of a move. So wherever I am on the line, there's like a line right past me, and whoever has more than me is rich. And wherever I am, I'm the line for not rich, right? But what happened to me during that season, right? When I was able to put myself in a place where I realized what was happening with these refugees, I came to a place you go, you know what? I got to own this. I got to take this to heart. What Paul is talking about, he's talking to me. And I think he's talking to you. In fact, compared to most people, did you know that you really are rich? I mean, the statistics on this are crazy, right? You don't think I'm making this stuff up. You can find it on Google. Did you know that if you have just sufficient food, decent clothes, and you live in a house or apartment and have some means of transportation, that you're in the top 15% of the world's wage earners? Did you realize that? Listen to this. If you earn $25,000 or more annually, okay, $25,000 or more, you're in the top 10% of the world's wealthy. 10%. And here's this one's crazy. If your combined household income, right, and I know this is not all of us in the room, but if your combined household income is $48,000 or more, you're actually in the top 1% of wage earners in the world. The top 1%. So the majority of us that live in Miami, again, I know this is not all of us, the majority of us would fall into the category of rich. And what happened to me that night and in the season that followed is I had to own it. I'm rich. I'm blessed. And so Paul here, when he says, hey, command those who are rich, he's talking to me. He says, Timothy, when you talk to the Gregs of this world, when you talk to people who are blessed, to people who have choice, who have options, when you talk to them, command them, right? And what do you think he was going to say? Like, what would he say? Command them to what? What would you tell somebody who's rich? Look what he says. Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant. How did he know? How did he know? How did he know that people who have more, who are blessed, how did he know that the inclination is toward pride, is toward being proud? How did he know that arrogance and pride seem to be the special curse of the rich? He says, tell them not to be arrogant. And then the next part, look what he says here. Don't be arrogant. And then he says, nor put your hope in wealth, which is so uncertain. He says, don't put your hope in wealth, which is so uncertain. You know, here's what he's saying. He's saying, listen, when you start to earn more, right? When your paycheck, or maybe you get a promotion, maybe your income goes up a little bit. He says, when you start to earn more, when you get a little bit more money in your savings account, he says, something starts to happen with your hope. He says, you don't see it coming, you don't plan on it, but what happens is as your lifestyle changes, as your bank account begins to grow, your hope begins to migrate. Your hope begins to shift, and your hope begins to shift toward your stuff. And your hope begins to shift towards your money and your riches. And Paul is saying, Timothy, you got to tell them. Don't let your hope migrate. Don't let your hope migrate towards your stuff and towards your accumulation of stuff. Have you ever felt kind of your attitude shift maybe around your stuff a little bit? Like as you become more successful or as you get a little bit more, right? But then look what he says, verse 17. He says, but... He could also say, instead of letting your hope migrate, instead of being arrogant, he says, instead, here's what you should do. Look what he says. Put your hope in God, who what? Richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. And Paul is saying, listen, remember, don't forget this. I know it's easy to forget, but don't forget that everything you have is a gift from God. He says, it's an expression of God's gracious generosity toward you. Now, I get it, right? Okay, I know that some of you are like pushing back right now, and you're like, all right, it's always the pastor dude. He's up there, right? And he's got some kind of trick at the end. There's no trick at the end, right? And I get churches get a bad rap for talking about money, and sometimes it's true. But here's why we have to talk about this. Here's why this is so important. Here's why Paul is saying this. Is because Jesus talks a lot about money. Jesus talks a lot about money because he knows that the chief competitor for you, the chief competitor for your heart is your stuff. Right? The opposite of God is not like Satan or the Halloween or something crazy, right? None of you struggle with that. But you do struggle, and I do struggle with our stuff, with our accumulation of stuff. In fact, Jesus just said it like right at the point. He was saying this, and Matthew recorded it in Matthew 6. Jesus said this. He says, your heart will be where? Where your riches are. This is a core teaching of Jesus. He says, hey, where your stuff is, where your things are, where your money is, where your treasures are, where you spend your money, guess what? That's where your heart is. And the chief competitor for your heart, this is why Jesus cares so much about, Jesus doesn't need your money. He don't want your money. You know what he wants? He wants you. He wants your heart. And he says the chief competitor for that is your stuff. It's your accumulation of stuff. It's the stuff that you want. It's the stuff that you dream about. It's the stuff that you have. And so Paul is saying, hey, Timothy, you gotta tell them. You got to tell them. And I know they don't want to hear it, and people are going to be like this. They're going to get all quiet and like, hurry up and get this thing over with. But you got to keep telling them, Timothy, because it's important. You got to tell people, like, put your hope in God. Don't put your hope in stuff because it's fleeting. But put your hope in God who will richly provide to you. And do you notice the end of that? It's kind of interesting. He says, for your enjoyment. He provides everything you need for your enjoyment. Isn't that interesting? Like, why would he say that? Right? I mean, most sermons or whatever you heard on, it's like, well, it's not about your enjoyment, right? It's like, oh, I got to give, right? No, he's saying, listen, this isn't about like self-indulgent. This isn't eat, drink, be merry. But this is a perspective that God is saying, listen, everything is a gift. Everything is a gift. It's a gift from God. Everything you have is God's gracious generosity toward you, and you should enjoy it. You shouldn't feel guilty for being successful. You shouldn't feel shame for being successful. You shouldn't feel bad for having more, but you should enjoy it with a posture of gratitude. You should enjoy it with a posture of gratitude. Now, I've got 3 kids, 8, 7, 4, right? And most of the time when they come to me, right? Those of you who are parents in the room, you'll know this, right? Most of the time they say, hey, give me a, or I need a, or you owe me, right? And it's this what? It's this posture of what? Entitlement, right? Like, my son said this to me the other day. He said, I need a. I said, well, yeah, I'm about to give you what you need, right? I'm going to give you what you need right out the side of the, right? But I need a, right? Now, what happens when my kids come to me with I need a or give me a posture? It's usually not pretty, right? But on the other hand, like once every 25 years, right? They're not even that old yet. But once in a blue moon, right? Once every 4th full moon, right? One of my kids will come up to me and go, Dad, thank you. Thanks for taking us out to eat. Or thanks for taking me to Legoland. Thank you. I really, what happens when that happens? I pass out. Right? I go to the hot, no, okay. Right? But there's something that my heart melts. I'm like, you're expressing gratitude. Like we got to enjoy. We got to go to Legoland, or we got to go out to a nice dinner, or we got to go do something fun. Why? It costs money. We had to sacrifice to do that. But you're expressing your gratitude. The same thing's true here. He's saying, listen, this is not about guilting you or shaming you or making you feel bad for being successful or having more. That's not it. But the posture is a posture of gratitude. It's like, man, thank you. Thank you for your generosity. Thank you for more. Thank you for letting me do that. He goes on. He tells us now what to do. He says, verse 18, he says, command them to, right? He says, hey, to keep your hope from migrating, to keep you from embracing the stuff instead of the one who gave you the stuff. He's going to say, here's 4 things you should do. Here you go. I'll show them to you. Number 1, do good. Command them to do good. And I think he would say it even this way. Don't do good in the average way. He says, hey, you who are rich, you who are blessed, you who have much. He says, don't feel guilty about being rich. Don't feel guilty about having much or having more. He says, no, but rather do good. Like use your resources. Use what you have for good. Use it for good. And then when he keeps going, he says, not only do good, he says, be rich in good deeds. He says, do good and be rich in good deeds. He says, in other words, you can say it this way, the more that you have been blessed, the more that you have, the more opportunity you have. The more opportunity you have. He's saying, hey, do more good. Do more good. Be known for doing good. Not average good, like more good. Unleash unprecedented amounts of good. And then he says 3 and 4, they go in the same sentence next. He says, beyond that, he says, and be generous and willing to share. Give freely. Be willing to share. Be willing to share. Now, why are we talking about this? Right? Obviously, this is a big deal to Jesus. But you know what's true statistically if you study this? Is you realize that the more, right, the more that people have, the more that people make, the more that people are blessed, the less generous they become. Right? It's just a fact. Especially here in the United States, the more money a person makes, the less generous they are. That seems backwards, doesn't it? You would think the more you have, the more you give. But it's actually different because something happens inside of us as humans. The more that we make, we begin to want to protect. We begin to want to save. We begin to want to put walls around what we have. And so actually, the more someone makes, the less they give. Now, richer people with more may give larger sums, but they actually sacrifice less. They give a smaller percentage, right? And this is a big deal. And in fact, there's this amazing story that Jesus did. There was one day that Jesus had his followers, and he had the 12 disciples. And one day they were at the temple. Now you need to know at the temple at that time, which is a terrible system. I don't know why they did this, but this is, right? They had a big pottery jar, kind of like this, probably bigger than this, right? But they had this kind of at the door, right? And the idea is that when you were going into the temple or coming out of the temple, that this was the offering pot, right? And so here they are, and Mark records this. He says, one day Jesus got his guys. He said, hey, come over here. And he gets his 12 guys, and he goes, hey, I want you to just watch this. Now, that had to be a little strange, right? Like, okay, we're going to watch this, right? But I want you to watch what's going to happen here. It's a teaching. He's got a teaching. He's going to make a point here. So they start watching this, and you'll see it'll be on the screen, Mark 12:41. It says, Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings, again, the pot, were put, and he watched the crowd putting their money into the treasure, right? So they're off to the side, and they're over here, and they're just kind of watching. They're just observing. And then here's what he says. Mark says that many rich people threw in large amounts. Okay? So a lot of wealthier people with a lot, with more, they would throw into a lot. Now, again, there's a teaching. Jesus says, hey, don't let your right hand know what your left hand is doing. Part of this is a reaction to this kind of system that they had. Because what would happen, right? The money back in that day was all coins. There weren't paper bills. There was no Venmo. There was none of that stuff, right? So it was just coins. And they were pots. So what happens, right, when coins go into pottery, right? So somebody rich comes along, right? Oh, I've got a lot. Are everybody watching? You guys see that? Ooh, heads up, about to give. Woo! Yeah, look at me, right? Right? It was very showy, right? It was a moment where you can see how much I'm giving. The length of it and the loudness of it is going to communicate how generous I am. Right? And so they're telling, a lot of people came by and they were pouring coins in there and it was making all these noises, clinking and clanking around. And then look what he says, 42. He says, but a poor widow came and she put in 2 very small copper coins, only worth a few cents. Right? So this little widow walks over and she goes like this. Well, that's not very impressive. In fact, the coins, they were the smallest amount of money in that culture. In fact, there was not even a Greek or a Roman equivalent to the coins. And she puts them in the jar. And then what Jesus, remember, he's over here on the side with his guys. What he does next is so extraordinary. He's got his guys. And it's going to really show the heart of God, show the heart of Jesus, and how God views wealth and how God views generosity. Look what he says. Verse 43. He says he calls them together. Let's huddle up, guys. Let's huddle up. And he says this. Jesus said, truly I tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. Now, if I had been there, I would be doing exactly what you would do, right? I'd be like, time out, Jesus. Time out. Listen, okay, I know you're a carpenter. You're probably good with wood, but you're not really good with math, right? And I'm Ivy League, so let me just kind of educate you a little bit, Jesus, MBA here. That's not true. You maybe can't count, but 2 over a lot, right? And like, did you see the guy, Jesus, that poured in like 1,000, right? And Jesus is like, no, she gave more. Look, hold up, Jesus. I don't think you're getting it. Did you see the dude with the 10,000? I mean, that was impressive. I mean, he was over there for several minutes. He had servants to help bring all the coins so they could pour. It was a show, man. They should have had like smoke and stuff going. That was awesome. Did you see that? And he's like, no, she gave more. You see, the number of zeros is not what impressed Jesus. It had more to do with the heart. It had more to do with the sacrifice. It had more to do with the percentages. And that's why he says this, verse 44. He says, they, the rich people, the people that poured in a lot, he says, they gave out of wealth. He says, but she, the poor widow, she gave out of her poverty. She put in everything. All she had to live on. And she's like, hey, it's not about the zeros. It's about the heart. It's about the sacrifice. It's about the giving beyond. And here's what Jesus is teaching. Here's why Paul was writing this to Timothy. Here's why this is so important to me. This is so important to you. This is so important to our church. God is calling us to give more, to be generous people. He's calling us to give higher percentages. He says, hey, you want to move the heart of God? You want to be a generous person? You want to make a difference? You want to unleash unprecedented amounts of generosity? You need to give more. You need to sacrifice more. You need to give higher percentages. And it's not about guilt and shame, and it's not about trying to make you feel bad. And the goal today is not to make you feel bad or guilt and shame, but the goal is like, hey, just own it. Own it like I had to do in 2010. Like, God, I'm blessed. I got a lot. I'm owning it. I'm the guy Paul's talking to. I'm rich in this present world. And I'm owning that. And I just want to be good at it. Be good at it. You've got opportunity. Be good at being rich. Now, I know that there are objections. I know that Miami is an expensive place to live. The cost of living here is very high. I know that there's a gap. In fact, Miami has one of the largest gaps between actual income and cost. And it's hard. I have trying to raise 3 kids here. It's very expensive. I get it. It's not easy. But I feel like if Paul were here or if Jesus were here, they'd be like, I get it. I get it. But man, don't give up. Don't give up. Take a step. Take your next step toward being generous. Don't live closed-handed. Live open-handed. Try to be more and more generous. Give more. Sacrifice more. Model after this little poor widow who gave the 2 cents. Like, give what you can. Now, I'm going to wrap this up, but I want to just give just some real practical, kind of almost common sense, just real practical, simple application. In fact, if we were sitting down over coffee and you were asking me some just principles about stewardship and giving and generosity, I would probably share some of this with you. And so the first thing that has really been a game changer for me and my family is what I call the give, save, live principle, right? Really no rocket science here. But the idea is that when you get paid, when the money comes in, when you earn a wage, that the first thing you do is give. The second thing you do is save. And the third thing you do is you live on the rest. And you may, on that live part, have to readjust your life a little bit to fit in that. But here's the big principle, and here's what my coaching is whatever you decide those percentages are, you've got to pre-decide. You got to pre-decide. You can't wait in the moment. Like, well, how am I feeling today? Which way's the wind blowing? How did that taco settle last night? You can't wait till the moment, right? You got to pre-decide. And so one of the things I would encourage you to do, whether you're married or single or whatever your family dynamic is to sit down together or to sit with yourself and maybe a trusted advisor and go, hey, I want to be a generous person. I want to move toward being open-handed. I want to follow the model of what Paul is telling Timothy and what Jesus is talking about in Mark. I want to move that way. And so I'm going to decide now. And then you set it up to go. You automate it. Don't question it. Don't have to think about it, right? But give, like, what percentage are you going to give? Do that first. Save second. And then you got to figure out how to live on the rest. Give, save, live. It's a great principle. Here's the second principle. This one's similar in that it's be a percentage giver. You know, most people are emotional givers, right? Something moves you, like, oh, I'll throw a couple dollars over there. But one of the things, I've been married now about 13 years, and one of the things my wife and I did before we got married is we knew, we were in agreement, we were synced. We're like, you know what, we want to be generous. I mean, at the end of our lives, we want to be generous. And we want to be known for being generous. And so we made a decision, right, together, a lot of prayer, a lot of thought, a lot of counsel. We made a decision that when we were married, from the very beginning, we were going to give 10% of everything we made away. Just boom, right off the top. Start there. And we're going to, every single year, we were going to try to increase that percentage. And here we are 13 years later, and we've increased that percentage every single year because we want to be generous. And we knew this isn't important. And so I think there's a principle here that Jesus is saying, hey, it's about the heart, it's about the level of sacrifice, and that has a lot to do with percentages, right? Not zeros, it has more to do with percentages because it has a lot to do with how much you're giving and sacrificing. Here's the third one. Now, this one gets a little fun. I call this the 90-day challenge, okay? The 90-day challenge is this idea that I am so confident in God. I'm so confident in His extraordinant generosity and His grace. I have personally lived this and experienced this now for decades. That I am so confident in God that I'm going to say, hey, why don't you just try this out for 90 days? In fact, it's really interesting. The only time in all of the God's Word that we see that He tells His followers to test Him is in this area. And He said, test me in this and see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven. Because He's saying, hey, it's not about the money. When it comes to your stuff, what God really wants is your heart and your trust. Right? This is a trust thing. Right? This is that part of that. What's your next step of faith? This is a trust thing. And so the idea of coming up with a percentage, whether it be 10% or whatever the percentage you come up and say, hey, like my wife and I did, the first 10% is going. It's going to the church. It's going to God. And we made that. That was a trust decision. That was a faith decision. Right? And I believe in God so much, and I'm so confident in Him, and I know that He blesses those who give generously. And so this is the challenge. For 3 months, okay, it's not really 90 days, but it's right in the range, right? For October, November, December, right? For the rest of 2019, the challenge is if you will take 10% right off the top, whatever it is that you earn, if you will take 10% and give, right? And you will give. If at the end of the 3 months, God has not lavishly blessed you, if your heart and life haven't been transformed, and then we'll give it back to you, 100% of it. All you got to do, there's a email address, hello@miamichurch.com. So you send an email to hello@miamichurch.com and just say, I'm in. I'm doing the 90-day challenge. Here's what I'm doing. Everything from October 1st to December 31st. I'm so confident in God that He's going to just pour His blessing on you, that you're going to move from a closed, fisted person to more of an open-handed. I'm so confident in God that's an easy challenge to offer. 90 days. Again, just maybe you want to just try it. Test me and see, God says. Test me and see. So here it is. Let's wrap this up. I want to put it all together. Here's what he wrote. Here's what Paul, the Apostle Paul, wrote to Timothy. It's from the Message. This is beautiful how he puts it. He says, Timothy, he says, tell those who are rich. That's me. That's you. Right? Tell those who are rich in this world's wealth. What's he telling? He says, hey, quit being so full of yourself and so obsessed with your money, which is here today and gone tomorrow. Instead, do this. Tell them, Timothy, you tell them to what? Go after God, who piles on all the riches we could ever manage. Do good. Do good. Be rich in helping others. The more you have, the more opportunity you have. Be rich in helping others. And be, I love this, extravagantly generous. Be extravagantly generous. Be good at it. Be good at being rich. And here's what he says. Hey, Timothy, listen. This is why the 90 to challenge. If they do that, if you really do that, if you live this way, He says they'll build a treasury that will last. I love this last line. Gaining life that is truly life. Abundant life. Life that's different, so countercultural. Life that is truly life. Can I pray over you?
Thanks so much for tuning in. We hope it brought you encouragement and hope for the rest of the day. If you have any questions or want to talk to someone, click the link in our bio and contact us at hello@miamichurch.com. And if you want to support what God's doing here at Miami Church, feel free to go to miamichurch.churchcenter.com/giving. And finally, if you haven't subscribed, go ahead and do that. We love you and hope you have a great day.